From a top secret network of highly secure locations across North America, this is the Spurs Insider podcast, brought to you as always by Taco Palenque, where the best happy hour in San Antonio just got happier. Stop by any of the Taco Palenque locations Sunday through Thursday for ice-cold 550 margaritas, $3 domestics, $3 off ponchos, and $1 off panchitos. Taco Palenque keeps San Antonio cool and well-fed, and is the best pre- or post-game meal for watching the Spurs. We're watching the Spurs across the country. I'm your host, Mike Finger, joined as always by Express News beat writers Tom Orsborn and Jeff McDonald, with Express News sports editor Nick Talbot. We are a week into regular season Wemby mania. This is hitting your earbuds, your podcast players on Wednesday. We're not going to talk about last night's Tuesday game against the Kevin Durant-led Phoenix Suns, just because, let's be honest, it wasn't that interesting. There's nothing that happened last night in Phoenix that we would possibly mention on this podcast that hits your earbuds on Wednesday. So we're going to talk about everything that led up to last night's game. Tom Orsborn, what sticks out to you about the first week of Wemby mania?
Wow. It came crashing down in Los Angeles. You guys were out there. I watched that one from the living room, and it was ugly.
But overall, we have not spoken to the listeners since Victor Wembanyama made his regular season debut. And yes, the LA game was an understandable road hiccup that happens to a lot of young teams. But so far, Jeff, I mean, the Victor Wembanyama thing has gone. He has. I will say this: he has not played, and we're not going to talk about last night, because who would want to talk about last night? But he has not played a complete half yet in terms of, like, this is Victor Wembanyama, what we expected of him. There's been little 2-minute, 3-minute stretches where he's dominated, but his overall numbers, his overall contributions have been good, and we have not seen him at his best for a complete half of basketball yet.
Yeah, it's kind of it's been maybe what we expected, like these flashes of brilliance, or like we've been talking about since the season, since the preseason. Like, there'll be these 4 or 5 moments in every game where you're just like, I've never seen that happen on a basketball court before. But also a lot of bumps in the road, a lot of 2 out of 3 losses so far, and some moments where he's looked like a 19-year-old rookie. And and maybe we haven't made enough of the fact that he's a 19-year-old rookie, like 19-year-old rookie. Like, Tim came here when he was 21 and fully formed. Victor's 19, and there's not a lot of history, if at all, in the NBA of a teenager coming into the league and just dominating from game 1 to game 82 of his rookie season. So there's going to be a lot of learning. There's a learning curve. And I expect, as he gets more comfortable and starts to figure out ways to impose himself on the game, I think we'll see those flashes of brilliance will become more frequent, and you'll see him taking over some games here or there.
I guess the brightest spot was in Houston in that fourth quarter when he had 9 points, including the very decisive, strong move that led to the bucket that sent the game to overtime. He scored it with about 20 seconds left. That stands out. And then the right hand, left hand block of Jabari Smith. That was pretty sweet to watch.
That was the jump that he made from game 1 to game 2, and Jeff talked about learning to impose his will, learning how to play in the NBA. Part of that was that we can talk a little bit about the opening night against the Dallas Mavericks, which was kind of a letdown for a lot of people, because you just didn't see enough of Victor Wembanyama, because he was in foul trouble the entire game. Picked up quick fouls almost every time he was on the court, and from game 1 to game 2, he sort of figured out how to avoid that, and that's going to be probably an ongoing process. But the improvement from that first game where he couldn't stay on the court to avoiding foul trouble in game 2. And like Tom said, highlight reel type plays, jaw dropping plays at both ends of the floor with the game on the line in the fourth quarter. I think every week when we come together and talk about Wemby and talk about the progress of this team, you have to look at the good and the bad. And there have been, we're recording this on Tuesday before the Phoenix game, so there have been three games so far, and there have been moments in every one of those 3 games, including the 40-point loss to the Clippers, where Victor Wembanyama just makes your mouth open in wonder. He finished 2 ridiculous lobs against the Clippers in that blowout, one with his right hand, one with his left hand, where it looked like the lobs were bad lobs. They weren't close, and he just sort of reaches his hand out and scoops them in, and we're almost already taking him for granted how amazing he is. It's almost becoming ho-hum because they're 1-2 at the time of this recording, coming off a 40-point loss. But it's really going to be something to behold for all season long.
I think when you're evaluating these things too, like the level, this is obvious, but the level of competition matters as well. They played Dallas at home, which is probably a middle of the pack Western Conference team. They played Houston at home, which is still a bad Western Conference team. And then they go to LA for their first road game and play a Clippers team that's probably among the top 4 in the West. And it was almost a culture shock sort of moment, I think, for some of these guys too, because the step up in competition was really fierce. And another thing I think you'll see happen this year, I think early last year when everyone knew the Spurs were going to be bad, nobody was talking about them. They got zero hype. I think a team like the Clippers would sleep on them a little bit early in the season, and the Spurs might have a chance to be in that game or maybe even win that game. I don't think that's not going to happen this year because, I think there's a level of pride with a lot of these older, veteran, all-star laden teams. If you're a veteran all-star in this league, I think you want to take your shot at a guy with the hype that Victor brings. Like, you've heard about this guy all summer. He's the number 1 overall pick, and not only is he number 1 overall pick, he's like the most highly touted overall pick in forever. So you're not going to sleep on those guys, and the Spurs are going to have to be ready to get prepared to get some teams a better shot from some teams than maybe they were getting early last season.
It's a good point. And you could tell the Clippers were ready for him. And I think it'll be a common theme throughout. On one hand, the Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Zach Collins, Trey Jones type players are going to be really excited to play with more eyes on them. Maybe that will improve their play in the long run. But you're also getting a better shot from the guys who are wondering why in the heck, this team that lost all these games last year is getting all this love on TNT and ESPN. And it kind of works both ways. And we saw sort of both sides of it this past week. You saw the big finish from Wemby and the we could probably get into, again, talking about each of these games in more detail, but the end of the Houston game was like pandemonium, the excitement that you generally don't see in October in the NBA. True celebration, true excitement. The Spurs benefit from that, and then just get steamrolled from the beginning against the Clippers on the other side of it. Anything else? Let's go back to Dallas opening night, because we did not discuss that on last week.
I barely remember that. It's like we've lived a lifetime since then. It feels like
it does. But that was the NBA Finals atmosphere in mid-October, leading up to it. The number of media around the court, the number of media in the building for over 200 credentials from 8 countries, I think, just sort of absurd and ridiculous and preposterous. Type about a game, but
the place packs. The place packs like it hasn't been in forever. I think they sold some standing room only tickets. So I think if you go look it up, probably the attendance number that they reported for sellout for game 1 is probably higher than it's ever been for a regular season game.
It was what 18,947. I think that's more than they list for the arena can even hold. So
Right.
it's definitely one of their higher totals they've ever had there.
And the thing I noticed was, just for posterity, I wanted to take a video of Victor Wembanyama's first opening tip-off. And when you look in the background of that video, like all you see are fans on the other side of the arena, whereas last year it would have been just tons of empty seats, even probably for the season opener. There was not. The place was as packed as it could possibly be. I wonder how long that continues if they keep losing, but I think we've got a couple months still. People are still going to be very, very excited to watch this guy play.
Well, Friday night there was typical. In the first couple of minutes, Friday night at 7 p.m. for a tip-off is not a great combination in San Antonio, Texas, in the fall. And it was a late arriving crowd, understandably so. It's hard to get there at 7 o'clock, and it's Friday night football and all that. But by Tom, you'd say by the middle of the first quarter, second quarter, it was pretty well full again. I had my doubts there for a little bit.
Here's going to be your test. Here's going to be your test. Their next home game is Sunday afternoon, this coming Sunday afternoon, against the Toronto Raptors. Against the Toronto Raptors, which is not a glamour opponent, and it's opposite a Cowboys game, and not just any Cowboys game, but I believe the Cowboys are playing the Philadelphia Eagles.
Is that a
That
good
is
game?
correct. That is correct in the coveted 3:30 spot. Yes.
Yeah. So you're going to see your diehards. We're going to find out. And San Antonio is probably the biggest Cowboys market in the state outside of Dallas. I don't think probably is. I think it's definitely
in the nation.
San Antonio is one of the biggest NFL markets in the nation, and it doesn't have an NFL
in the nation.
Yeah. So that'll be your test of Wemby mania, I think.
I think it'll ebb and flow. There will be games, moments, times over the course of the season where people are going to be really into it. Maybe there will be some losing streaks and some games that aren't quite as attractive where people turn away for a little bit. But man, like walking into the arena formerly known as Staples the other day, I've been coming to that arena for several years now, an annual trek, and it's the place where you see a lot of media, and it's one of the media capitals of the country and the world, Los Angeles, and those games are always well attended, always well chronicled, always well covered. And getting my bag checked, walking in, the security guy you see every year says, "Man, there's a lot of media here today," and that was never the case, and that's by his standard. That's by Staples Crypto.com standard. Just people came out of the woodwork in Los Angeles to see the Clippers, not the Lakers, Clippers, play a team that has been in the lottery for 2 years in a row. It just shows you, and we can talk about that interview room that has been spacious, has been luxurious for the last 6-7 years that we've used it to talk to Pop and Spurs players after games. It was like a sardine can the other day. Like you couldn't get people had to take their backpacks off to fit through the door to talk to Victor Wembanyama. It was quite a scene.
It was like a Manhattan subway in there.
There you go.
For those not paying much attention, that was before the Clippers went out and traded for James Harden, which the day
that was indeed.
When I was talking about it earlier, and I said the Clippers were probably top 4 in the West. Now I'm not so sure.
They took a step back.
They might have dropped with that trade. We'll see.
Yeah. But again,
you want to talk about some other players besides Wemby? You got anything else on the agenda?
Well, I think we can at least get to the halfway point with Wemby, and wanted to mention too that because there are going to be more games where he's disappointed and doesn't play well. We've seen through 3 that he doesn't seem to be cracking under the hype microscope yet. He's still been Victor Wembanyama. He's still been patient and thoughtful and cooperative after games. I think he has a good perspective. He mentioned, why would you get frustrated only 3 games into a season? He does the best PR job the Spurs have ever done for their Pound the Rock slogan, where he eloquently describes the whole thing in like a 1-minute soliloquy, breaking it down. Sometimes you sort of need outside eyes or someone from another country, someone who didn't grow up around it, to describe something that you've heard for many, many years in a new way. I thought that was interesting.
That opening sentence to that answer, Mike, was to your point. It was so great. He says, "We got a famous saying in San Antonio. It's pound the rock, and it has a deep meaning." That's so wonderful.
Yes, he's really something, and just peppered with questions from, because there are national, LA type media reporters who were getting their first chance to talk to him. They asked him questions he's been asked many times before, but he's been patient with that, kind of putting his new spin on some of these answers. And I've really been impressed with how he's handled himself so far. And there's going to be a time during a 4-game losing streak, which will inevitably come at some point, when he's just going to say enough of this, and he's probably not going to be his delightful self. But
maybe
we get on athletes in this business, coaches in this business, for not handling themselves well. We call them out when they act like jerks, and I think that it's fair to kind of point out that this 19-year-old superstar is handling himself pretty well so far.
So far he's been Ginobili-esque in that regard. Yeah, where you would get Manu after every game, win or lose, and he would give you great stuff. And even when he was visibly frustrated and understandably upset, he was still engaging with you. And we've seen that from Victor again at age 19. We didn't even get a shot at Manu until he was 25.
Manu often did it in 3 languages. Of course, Wemby's doing it in 2, which is all the more impressive.
Slacker.
Both those guys. Yeah.
So on that note, Jeff and Tom are giving Victor Wembanyama the Manu Ginobili Trophy. And if you're into trophies, New York Times bestselling author Shea Serrano and Emmy winner Jason Concepcion are back together again, this time aiming their high-powered microscope at the NBA. In their new weekly podcast, 6 Trophies. Jason and Shea cover the biggest storylines in the league by handing out 6 pop culture-themed trophies for 6 basketball-related activities. Things like the Ryan Gosling and Drive Trophy, which is given out to a player or a team that did something incredibly cool that week. Or the Lauryn Hill You Might Win Some But You Just Lost One Trophy, which is given out to a player or a team that tried something but it didn't work out that great for them. Or the Walter White Tread Lightly Trophy, which is given out to a player or a team approaching dicey territory. Kick back as Jason and Shea recap the top happenings from around the NBA through their lens of movies, music, and more. Follow 6 Trophies on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to 6 Trophies ad-free right now on Wondery Plus. If that's the last 6 Trophies segue I ever do, I could die happy. I think I can die feeling like I've done my job. I've made my contribution to the world. Anyway, we appreciate Shea and Jason for helping us out during October. Jeff, you wanted to talk about other players besides Victor Wembanyama?
First, I wanted to give you the Boris Diaw Great Segue Trophy. What's that segue?
That's pretty good. Describe to the viewers and listeners what that double entendre is.
Well, it was always a great story about Boris before he came to San Antonio, when he was with the Charlotte. I guess they were the Bobcats at the time, and he lived within downtown Charlotte, within walking distance of the arena, but still took a Segway to work. He had one of those little Segways that you ride,
Segway scooter, as opposed to Segway, the verbal transition.
Yes, that was it was a pun. It was a pun. I'm good at puns. Other players, is it 3 games in, so let's make some final binding determinations on the Jeremy Sohan at point guard experiment.
Oh, you want to be controversial on this podcast, huh?
Let's do it.
What's your thought? What's your take?
Well, number one, it sounds like no matter what my take is, or anyone's take is, they're going to stick with this for a while. Is that the idea you got from Pop? He called it the official 2023-2024 experience. This team, that seems like more than just a 3-game sample that they're willing to give it. But
you mentioned the year 2024.
Yeah,
he didn't just say 2023.
That's a good point. I mean, it hasn't been great so far. Like statistically, it hasn't been great. I pulled up the numbers. That starting five with Sohan in the starting five, that's their most used five-man lineup by a significant margin, and it has a net rating of a negative 33.3.
Is that good?
So that's not good. But if you take out Jeremy Sohan and you put Trey Jones, and the other four guys are the same, that's their second most used lineup, and that has a net rating of a positive 11.4. So that's like a 40-point swing on that net rating.
44, some would say.
Well, I was told there would be no math.
Okay. Here's some thoughts on that. I think that they're going to keep trying. I don't know how long they're going to keep trying, but this wasn't just a spur of the moment decision. I think there was thought that was put into it by not just one head coach, but by multiple people in the organization. And I don't think they're going to throw it out after 3 games. But also, I think even if you keep starting that group, that doesn't mean that has to be your most played 5-man group necessarily. I think that you could start that group and make some substitutions earlier and have the rotations end up with different groups on the floor that aren't that 5-man group. Sometimes we get too obsessive over the starting 5 when we should be paying more attention to the finishing 5 or the most used 5. And there was
the one game the Spurs won. Who was the point guard in the final 5 minutes of overtime against Houston?
I think that was Trey Jones.
That is correct.
So you might see more of that, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And I sort of understand the rationale for trying, and that these are your best 5 guys. Maybe best is the wrong word. Most promising 5 guys. See how they play together. Let's just try something new. Trey Jones is never going to be an all-star, all-NBA point guard. So as long as he's got the mentality that he's fine coming off the bench and he can contribute in any way the Spurs need him to contribute, which is what Trey Jones is. Like if you look at those 6 guys who are their top 6 players and ask yourself, who would most easily, most seamlessly, most cooperatively go to the bench? Like it's Trey Jones. And maybe that's why they did it this way. It's just because Trey will be most positive about it. But I see trying it, and I see probably an expiration date on it if it doesn't start improving. But I don't think that it's the end of the world to keep trying it for a month, for 6 weeks, or whatever. And
I think the worst thing you can do when you make any of these decisions is, try it for 3 games and abandon it. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
Like, if you spend all offseason deciding this is the way you want to start, and there are reasons for it, it makes no sense to completely abandon it 3 games in. Now, maybe 20 games in, maybe 40 games in, but not 3. That unit with Sohan as the starting point guard, it's got to be better defensively. Like, that's what you think it's going to be, is these long-armed, switcherific defenders, and we've seen it a little, but if you, again, small sample size, but if you look at the analytics, the defense, they've not been great defensively, even though sometimes the first quarter against the Clippers, that unit caused all kinds of havoc defensively. Now, it was also coughing the ball up offensively and turning the ball over like crazy, and so the Spurs went into the end of the first quarter having given up 23 points to that team, that very good team, but still trailing by 5 because they could only manage 18 because they were throwing the ball all over the arena formerly known as Staples. So it's kind of both sides of that coin. But overall, that lineup has not been great defensively. And for it to work, it has to be great defensively because we know there's going to be some offensive limitations there. The spacing's not going to be great with that unit and without a point guard organizing it.
And Pop, what did Pop say about, it's our experiment for the 23-24 season? Kind of signaling that it's for the long haul, I would think.
Tom must have missed part of this podcast, which we mentioned that earlier.
I'm sorry. Ay.
Tom's secure location, which is not far from mine, I don't think, here in the great American Southwest. But that's fine. That's fine.
I'm trying to get.
I'm trying. Observation. It's worth mentioning twice.
I'm trying to get the early story done for sports editor Nick Talbot. So that's kind of been distracted here, but
no, it's worth.
no
I'm sure our viewers
excuse.
I'm sure our listeners might have been dozing off during one of my long monologues, so it's worth mentioning the finer points a second time. No, that's good.
What is the early
job,
story about that people can pick up in the paper on this fine Wednesday morning when they might be listening to this, Tom?
Devin, vowing to continue to be aggressive. Pop wants him to be selfish. He says, "I'm going to be selfish." Pop says, "I want you to be our go-to guy." Devin says, "I'm going to be your go-to guy." And leading off with his little trash talking incident with Dylan Brooks the other night, which was out of character, and for a guy who describes himself as being laid back and kind of signaling that he's a more assertive Devin Vassell this season.
I'm not sure how
he was kind of yapping at Zubac the other night too.
Yes, he did. Down 18 points, I think, in the second quarter. He finished on Zubac, did the trash talk there. So that might be a new part of selfish Devin's game.
He's been hanging around Sohan too long, I think.
Pick that up in your Express News hard copy on Wednesday, and it'll obviously be available in the Express News Spurs Nation newsletter at expressnews.com. Get all that good stuff. To finish up the starting lineup discussion, I think as Jeff made, I'll give him a good point trophy, although that doesn't follow Shea's thing. Who makes good points? Which celebrity can we name that trophy after? I don't know.
I'll put some thought to that.
Put some thought into that. As Jeff said, if you're going to spend the entire offseason saying we're going to do this and abandon it after 3 games, that makes a coaching staff look more incompetent or directionless in my mind than one that sticks with something for a while, even if it's not working. If you just abandon something after 3 games, then what the hell are you doing? So yeah, I get the frustration for people who see it and think this doesn't work. But if once you've started trying it, like, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to that group to just make sure, because you're not going to compete for a championship this year. And yes, we'll finish with this, but Greg Popovich famously said on the first day of training camp on media day this year that this season is going to be about winning in the way that previous seasons were about learning. And I don't necessarily think it's a complete contradiction to try new stuff and to still remember that there's learning involved just because you're also trying to win. This is just, I'm babbling, but this season can be about winning. This season can have higher expectations. I think the Spurs have higher expectations. I think they want to win more than 30 games. But that doesn't mean that every game you just go 100% trying to win the moment rather than think of the long term. I think there's still an opportunity to keep the long-term project in mind while you're trying to win more. But go ahead, Jeff.
Well, that's what I was going to say. They ain't making the playoffs. So if there's a season to experiment and even have it turned out to be a failed experiment, this is it. And also, I don't think either Trey Jones or Jeremy Sohan is probably your starting point guard at of the future, in the sense that they're going to be your starting point guard when you're competing for titles again. So, what difference does it make? I guess is my point. Who's doing it now?
I'm not bashing anybody who says this is ugly and I don't like it. Because there have been moments on the floor this year, there have been probably extended moments on the floor where it's been ugly and people who like basketball don't like it. And for people to point out that Pop said this year was going to be about winning. Well, I was one of those people who asked him that in the interview room the other night. Like, that's a legitimate thing to bring up too. But I do think that.
What was his answer to that question?
Well, he was about to give a really good answer, and then all hell broke loose. All hell broke loose in that room, where it was like a clown car in reverse, where the door opens and I think people are still walking into that room. It was like you thought it was full, you thought it was over, and then 19 more people would come into a room that's the size of the closet where one of our secure locations
is. So just to explain to the viewers and listeners, what had happened was the room where Pop does his post game at the arena formerly known as Staples is at one end of this long hallway near the Spurs locker room. And those of us that have covered the Spurs there multiple times have come to realize if you try to enter from the end of the hall, the opposite end of the hallway, which is the way we normally come in, it's closer to the Clippers locker room, there will be security there that will not let you in until all the Clippers players and staff have gotten to their locker room. And so you're just stuck there.
Yes.
And Pop is notoriously the fastest post-game coach ever. So what we learned to do is go to the other end of the hallway and make sure someone opens the door for us. So most of your San Antonio media was already seated in that room and had started with Pop when he's about to give the
by most of San Antonio media, you mean me, Jeff,
Andrew Lopez
of ESPN.
Yes,
there were only 3 people in that room having a very pleasant post game because
he's about to give like the answer of his life. Like he's about to give the best answer he's ever given to any question ever posed to him. And the door opens again, and 4,700 people walk through it. In this room, the room is not bigger than my living room. Like I want to explain that too. It's not very big.
I think it's much smaller than your living room. But
they're all crammed in there, and so Pop gets distracted by that. And when we go back, when our columnist tries to go back to get Pop to finish his answer, or really begin his answer, he's completely lost the thread and doesn't really feel like picking it up again. So mission unaccomplished there, I guess.
Yeah, but I think what he would have said is what we both said at the end of this talk. Like you can try. Of course, he wants to win more, and you can tell like that loss to the Clippers. He doesn't want to be losing. He doesn't want to be learning 40-point loss lessons this year. That's not optimal. He will try to make the best of it, and hope that many of those don't follow, like many of them followed last year. But I think one every now and then isn't a disaster. I think you move on to the next one. Like we will move on to the next one. We will see you next Wednesday. Until then, take care of each other and keep it real.